Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Starbase Flyover Update. My name is Mauricio, and today we'll be flying over Starbase, Texas. Hope you enjoy this flight. These photos were taken on Wednesday, July 5th, and we'll be flying over the Masseys test site, Sanchez, and the build site, with the final destination of the launch site. So fasten your seatbelts and enjoy the flight. Consider supporting our flyovers on Patreon for hundreds of premium flyover pictures every week. And without further ado, welcome to RGB Aerial Photography Starbase Flyover Update Episode 7. Starting off first at the Masseys test site, where SpaceX is preparing multiple test stands for ship, boosters, and test articles. Here's a map layout of the locations of the pads, comparing the first flyover taken on June 30th. Now sliding over to the second photo of Masseys taken on July 5th, with quite a few notable changes. As always, feel free to scrub back and forth the video to see more of the differences between these photos. Let's start off with the booster cryogenic testing station, which SpaceX has been constructing the past couple of months with the ultimate goal of shifting booster cryogenic testing responsibilities from the launch site over to Masseys. Looking closely at the concrete pad, we notice that GSE or ground support equipment lines going to the booster cryo station may have been purged and tested recently. As evident by this hone strewn across the pad, we were able to reach this conclusion after seeing the same test occur with the ship cryo station after that was fully constructed earlier in the year. This is a promising sign that SpaceX is preparing the pad to host a booster in the coming weeks. Moving down past the pipework, which looks to have been fully connected to the framework for the booster quick disconnect, we notice a possible new booster thrust puck shucker. After it was filled with concrete last week, we see these 13 mounting points are now visible amongst the concrete. These will have 13 hydraulic thrust ramps mounted on them, which we can expect to see installed in the coming week or two. To better understand, here's a render made by O from SpaceX 3D creation Eccentric to show how the booster thrust puck works. It's worth mentioning that the render depicts the older 9 inner engine booster design instead of the 13, and we can expect the design of the puck shucker at Masseys to vary slightly from this video. The 13 hydraulic thrust ramps we mentioned earlier will be used to press against the thrust puck of the booster. That is the structure where the Raptor engines are attached and is responsible for transferring the thrust from the Raptors to the rest of the vehicle. If it ever lost structural integrity in flight, the entire Starship vehicle will likely be destroyed, hence its importance in the booster testing campaign. We can expect these 13 thrust ramps, consisting of a cylinder tube, piston, and contact surface, to be installed and extended to press against the thrust puck of the booster in what is referred to as a puck shucker test. And this is what the ship puck shucker looks like. Moving down and to the left, we can see the two halves of the structural test cage still sitting here. We also see the bottom half still being prepared for use with the next article. This will likely be the payload bay test article currently being constructed in the high bay. More on that later. Moving past S26.1 and the can crusher, where we've seen no notable changes. We take a look at the Masseys tank farm, where these 3 horizontal liquid nitrogen tanks were installed a couple of weeks ago, likely to increase capacity in preparation for booster testing. More pipework has been connected to the tanks over the past week, although the connection between the tanks and the tank farm haven't been made yet. The liquid nitrogen in combination with liquid oxygen will simulate a ship or booster being loaded with cryogenic liquids under high pressure. Speaking of liquid oxygen, we move further up to the liquid oxygen tanks near the top of Masseys test site, where these 2 tankers appear to be busy offloading new liquid oxygen into the liquid oxygen storage tanks. This is a promising sign of imminent booster or ship testing at Masseys, where SpaceX has been busy upgrading and building new pads and test stands for the past few months. The last event we'll talk about for this corner of Starbase is deliveries. As seen in this ground photo I shot at the Rocket Garden on Friday, Booster 10 was placed on SPMTs in preparation for transport, which happened between the evening of July 7th and early morning of the 8th. Instead of turning left to the build site, we saw B10 head towards Masseys test site, which is a first for a booster. We can probably expect it to be tested at the booster cryogenic testing station in the coming week or two. Next up, we fly along Highway 4 to the 99,000 square meter Sanchez site. It's home to the air separation unit, the substation, and is also used as a construction site for various assemblies, including the steel plates for the water-cooled steel plate system, Mega Bay 2 sections, and more. Here is a first photo of the Sanchez site taken on Friday, June 30th. And here's a second photo taken on Wednesday, July 5th. As always, if you like more comparison time on these photos, feel free to scrub back and forth to see more of the differences. Starting off at the very left side of Sanchez, we see the new home for the ground fabrication building, after it was evicted from the build site by Phase 2 of the Star Factory expansion. This week, we noticed that concrete has now started to be poured over the yellow vapor barrier that was installed last week. This concrete will act as the base for the main section of the ground fabrication building, which had historically been used to construct and assemble various types of jigs, mounts, and other ground systems, such as tank farm assemblies. Most of this work involves the welding of steel together. Looking to the right, we see this booster transport stand which was originally used for Booster 5, then staged inside Mega Bay 1 for a long time where it was possibly being used as a work stand. It has now been moved to Sanchez, where we can likely expect it to be retrofitted to be able to support the weight of a booster full of crowd liquid during crowd testing on the pad at Masseys or at the launch site. Sliding further to the right, we see these 3 steel plate manifold assemblies since the last flyover. As of writing this video, they have since been moved to the launch site. Thanks to EpicSpaceFlight for this footage of the move captured on HoopCam. Slightly upwards is another steel plate assembly, where we notice that a length of pipe has been cut off the smallest of the 3 steel plate manifolds. The leading theory explaining this reasoning behind this strange decision comes from Ryan Hansen's Space, where he proposed that this is likely to make it easier to transport this assembly to the launch site in addition to easier fitting in between the white pipe near the orbital launch mount and the launch mount itself. Staged just above that are sections 2 and 3 of level 4 of Mega Bay 2, currently under construction. We also notice 3 assembly jigs lying vacant here, waiting for more sections to be assembled on them. This is one more empty jig compared to last week, since we saw the 4th section of the 3rd level being lifted and installed on the 1st of July. We can expect construction of the remaining level 4 segments to begin shortly. Now let's look at the very right hand side of Sanchez site, home to the inventory tent. Looking at this ground shot taken on Friday by Bob Kerman, it seems like this end of the inventory tent is starting to be closed up again, following the removal and transport of the centerpiece steel plate to the launch site. Moving on to the scrapyard, concrete forms are now being assembled around the square of pilings in the ground, following the ground around the pilings being dug up last week. This is in preparation for creating the piling cap for an unknown building or stand to sit on, with the top candidate being yet another ship or booster holding pad. We'll be sure to provide you with an update as soon as we know what will be going on top of this piling cap. Up here, we see the rocket garden. Thanks to Bob Kerman from Discord for providing this footage. We hope you had a nice visit to Starbase, Bob. From left to right sits Booster 11, Booster 10, which has now been moved to Masseys, Booster 4, SN15, Ship 27, Ship 20. And opposite to that in the foreground, Ship 26 is still being as lazy as ever despite having a ship transport stand staged right next to it for at least the past couple of weeks now. Get a move on already. Speaking of getting a move on, that concludes our tour of Sanchez. On to the build site, where SpaceX has been busy the past week with Phase 2 of the Star Factory expansion. Here's a labeled map showing the hectic factory where SpaceX is currently working hard to massively increase the production rate of Starship. Here we have a shot comparing the first flyover of the build site from June 30th. Now sliding over to show another few seconds of the photo from July 5th to compare the changes. In our first stop at the build site, let's take a look at the construction of Mega Bay 2. This past week, we witnessed the completion of level 3 stacking of the pre-built segments transported from Sanchez. Further down, the first section of level 4 is seen waiting impatiently to be lifted into place atop level 3. Once level 4 is fully stacked, only one more section will be left to be stacked before Mega Bay 2 is fully topped out. And as always, here's an updated rendering by Lolomatico 3D on Twitter showing the progress of Mega Bay 2 construction. Switching to another angle, we take a peek inside Mega Bay 2 older sibling, Mega Bay 1. As seen in this ground photo taken by me on Friday, both tanks on Booster 12 are still sitting on the left of Mega Bay 1, and Booster 9 is hiding in the back right section of Mega Bay 1. We saw some kind of long skinny tank attached to the side of the booster on June 6, but we're not quite sure yet what this is for. We can expect workers to be hard at work inside Booster 9, also preparing it for IFT-2. Sliding to the left, we see the high bay, used for constructing ships and currently another test article. Ship 28 and 29 remain under construction inside, and notably, we saw the payload bay door be reinstalled back into Ship 28 on June 5th, after the door was possibly modified to create a better seal. However, the more exciting assembly we see is a Frankenstein's monster of a payload bay test article. Seen here in this older render by the space engineer, we can likely expect that an internally stringered single ring with an axis hatch in it to be stacked under what we currently see in this photo, completing this test article ready for testing at Masseys, which will allow employees to access the interior of this test article from the lowest possible position. We previously saw this occur with Nose Cone 31, where it was also stacked with a single ring that had an axis hatch in it. Now sliding over to the right, we see more progress on Phase 2 of the Star Factory expansion. Starting off at the very top of the image, we see that the erecting of more framework has occurred over the past week, even going up around the press pit now. The press pit can be seen here and will be used by industrial pressing machines to press and form steel for starships of the future. Moving further down, we saw that a concrete pour was currently going on at the time of the flyover, with concrete being poured into the rectangular trench we saw being dug last week. We believe this is likely the beginning of a fire break wall, which will serve alongside numerous other fire break walls to prevent fire spreading throughout the facility if any occur. We also noticed that channels of various groups of conduit cables have been dug. Once functional, these are intended to provide power to the machinery and equipment that are to be used in this part of the factory once Phase 2 expansion has been completed. And here's yet another render by the space engineer showing the massive scale of Star Factory, which will be approximately 720,000 square feet once completed. Indeed, there's no such thing as too many Star Factory renders. We're on our 4th one right now and we're not stopping. Finally, wrapping up our tour of the build site, we look to the bottom right corner of this image, where we see the steel for the ground fabrication building lying next to its former home. We should expect to see all this hardware transported to Sanchez in the coming weeks. Now heading east to the launch site, just a short 2 to 3 minute flight down Highway 4. This site has seen a deluge of changes since April 20th, as SpaceX prepares the pad for the second launch of Starship. Here are 4-second shots comparing the first flyover of the launch site from June 30th. Here's another 4 seconds of the photo from July 5th to compare the changes. Starting off on the very left of the launch site, as seen from our perspective, is a suborbital launch site, the historical launch site of Starhopper and SN5 through 15. While not much has changed on Pad A since it's tested Ship 26 back in February, Pad B currently has Ship 25 sitting atop of it, following its 6-engine fire on June 26. Over here lies the engine shielding for S25, which is still removed. Our top candidate for why it may be removed is that the shielding may be getting replaced with much more robust shielding that can account for additional reverse thrust bouncing off the booster during hot staging between Ship 25 and Booster 9. This new feature was recently confirmed by Elon Musk, meaning Starship will not have continuous thrust and therefore a claimed payload increase of up to 10% to orbit. Next up is the middle of the launch site. The first thing we'll look at is a trench that was dug to serve as one of the foundations for future horizontal cryogenic storage tanks. We see that a lot more rebar has been installed in this trench over the past week, in preparation to create a piling cap, after we saw new pilings being installed in the area during the past month or so. To the right, we see conduit cables running through the trench and into the horizontal storage tank foundation trench closest to Highway 4 that was dug last week. As we predicted last week, this was expected and will likely be used for operating any valves or sensors on any future tanks to be installed. Now we look slightly further up the image to see the entrance of the launch site, where we had several rather interesting deliveries. These include the OLM work platform delivered on July 5th and the third and final steel plate on July 6th. As seen in this image taken by Starbase Surfer, this OLM work platform was delivered to the launch site from the crane yard where it was previously located. Referred to by SpaceX as the dance floor, it was lifted up to the launch ring on the morning of July 7th. This is to allow workers easy access to work on the engine base of boosters when it's mounted on the OLM, and also to easily access to all the hold-down clamp arms and Raptor QDs when no booster is mounted on the OLM. This is a promising step in the refurbishment of the launch table as SpaceX readies it for a second flight. Moving on to the back of the launch site, currently hosts to 6 high-pressure water tanks that will supply water to the steel plates during launch. This week, we spotted what could possibly be offload points installed next to the gas manifolds to offload water into all the water supply tanks seen here. Here's an updated render by ChromeKiwi, who has kindly allowed us to use this updated render of this area of the launch site for our episode this week. As the second flight of Starship approaches, keep an eye out for the water tankers around this area of the launch site to know when SpaceX is ready to test out the steel plate system. Next, let's switch angles to take a look at the water supply pipework. The supply pipework coming from the 2 new big water supply tanks has now been entirely connected all the way up until the submerged concrete vault near the OLM. It's also worth noting we see a cap poured on top of this pipe for a third large water supply tank to connect to in the future. And now we move on to the most anticipated and rapidly changing corner of Starbase, the orbital launch mount. SpaceX has been hard at work upgrading both the OLM and the pad it sits on after it was torn up and damaged during Starship's first orbital flight. This week, we saw progress on the water-cooled steel plate system designed to protect the concrete below from the thrust of 33 Raptor 2 engines. First, we begin with the hexagonal centerpiece steel plate seen here ahead of installation. Right after our flyover on Wednesday, it was lifted vertically onto this vertical transport stand fashioned out of Moulds steel, as it could only fit between the legs of the OLM while positioned upright and was also too wide to be lowered down through the launch ring. The steel plate was then rolled under the OLM by SPMTs, or self-propelled modular transporters, where it was tandem lifted off the transport stand by the yellow GMK 7750 crane, also known as Grover, and the launch site Liebherr LR 11000 crane. Finally, it was tilted back to a horizontal position and lowered all the way down onto the concrete pad underneath the head of installation, which we can expect to see happen over the next few weeks. Meanwhile, over by the orbital pad berm, we see another 3 steel plate sandwiches being worked on that are due to be positioned between the orbital launch mount legs that won't have water supply pipework running to them. These are currently still being worked on as of the writing of this video. Thanks to the space engineer, we see where these 3 steel plates will be located once they are installed and connected to the centerpiece steel plate. Thanks to TSC for providing us with even more awesome renders to show you during this episode. Be sure to check out his Twitter thread on the steel plate design for a more detailed explanation. Here's a video he made showing the progression of installation of the steel plate system. After the centerpiece hexagonal steel plate is installed, we can expect to see these 3 steel plate manifold assemblies we mentioned earlier be lifted and installed in these positions. As of writing of this video, one of them has already been installed on the night of July 7th after being transported from Sanchez. Spinning around, these smaller steel plates without manifolds will likely be the last to be connected to the giant center steel plate and then fully installed. The fully installed steel plate assembly will then be connected to these water supply pipes, highlighted here. SpaceX has moved at an extremely rapid pace this week with getting all 3 of the steel plate manifold assemblies to the launch site, and also positioned the center steel plate under the OLM ahead of installation. Although it remains to be seen how effective this system will hold up against the full thrust of the super heavy booster. It seems to me like we're about to find out sooner rather than later. Do you think the system will hold up during Starship's second launch? Let us know your predictions in the comment section below. Now looking underneath the OLM itself, as seen in this top-down shot. During this past week, yet another major concrete port occurred, with a small army of 171 concrete trucks arriving at the launch site throughout the night of Monday, July 3rd. The concrete port itself took a grand total of 15.3 hours to complete, with a total weight of 5,411 tons and over 2,000 square meters of concrete poured. A big thanks to Vix, Oscar, and Zack from CSI Starbase for keeping track of all the arriving trucks in this long period. Now looking inside the launch ring of the OLM, we see that both of the 2 stabilization pins that were removed from the top of the launch ring a while ago have now been reinstalled on top of the launch ring again. These were modified to account for locations of the sockets on the newer boosters, which are now located further away from the pin units and are also situated lower on the booster, due to Booster 9 no longer having hydraulic power units and instead relying on electric thrust vectoring. These stabilization pins will connect to the sockets and gently guide it down into the launch ring and vice versa during lifts. And before moving on to the orbital launch tower, we see that work is possibly starting on fixing and reconnecting the engine chill venting collection pipework from the oil lamp to the engine chill venting basin at the back of the launch site. Next, we move up to the orbital launch tower, where we notice that the ship quick disconnect has been reinstalled following its removal last month. Some modifications were made to this unit to allow it to sit higher. This is in order to account for hot staging hardware extensions being added onto all boosters from now on, which would therefore make the boosters taller. This backs up our theory that the hot staging is to be used immediately for the second launch of Starship rather than being a future design change. In addition, we notice that one of the retractable platforms at the end of the ship QD arm has been removed, likely for the same reason. We can likewise expect the other one to be removed as well. Finally, climbing up the launch tower, we see the American flag waving proudly after Independence Day. Ending our tour of the launch site, we look left to the tank farm, where we see the workers seem to have completed the reconfiguration and addition of brand new pipework and valves in this area of the orbital tank farm. And that's it for our Starbase Flyover Update Episode 7. I really hope you enjoyed this flight. Thank you for choosing to fly with RGV Aerial Photography. If you like what you saw today, please subscribe for more episodes and content so you don't miss out on the new videos each week. And also leave a thumbs up. Also consider supporting our flyovers through Patreon to gain access to our full flyover gallery the same day it occurs. All support helps to keep us flying each and every week. This is Mauricio, and that's all for now.